This is TWiT.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. 94% of CIOs and CISOs agree that attracting and retaining talent is increasingly critical to their roles. ACI Learning empowers your team to thrive while investing in the security of your business. Fill out the form at go.acilearning.com/twit for information on a free 2-week trial for your team. So, yesterday, breaking news. Judge in
the
San
Amazon
Francisco.
App Store for Windows 11 went generally available. Yeah, no, it's been a big day. I'm sorry. The other story.
The other story. We have now. I'm very confused because we've been reporting on this trial, this hearing. This hearing was. I did not realize. I should have read more closely. Merely on the injunction that the FTC filed, saying they better not do this merger before we have ruled. The administrative judge will be hearing the case in August.
I strongly recommend to everybody who cares about this to go and read this ruling. It is beautiful.
It's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah. And the best line, I'll cut right to the chase. I just love this. There are, despite the completion of extensive discovery in the FTC administration proceeding, including the production of nearly 1 million documents and 30 depositions, the FTC has not identified a single document which contradicts Microsoft's publicly stated commitment to make Call of Duty available on PlayStation and parenthetically on Nintendo Switch. Yeah.
But this is just on the injunction. This is not on, this is not the final ruling, which comes in August. Is the theory that, well, they're going to go ahead and do the merger and then let the FTC do what they want in August? Or does this ruling kind of get over, kind of like, well, will the administrative judge in August look at the San Francisco judge and say, well, yeah, clearly there's no merit to this and just throw it out? I don't understand why people are saying it's over.
There is a growing, it's over asterisks, right? I would say that this ruling sets the stage for the end, and the end being they acquire Activision Blizzard, right?
Like before August, they could do this. July 18th.
They could do it right now. They could literally do it today.
The drop dead date's July 18th because that's then. So they'll probably do it in the next week.
So here's
and
what's
the UK,
going on.
And then they go, what? Screw you, UK. You can't have any.
Yeah. So I can't remember how this came to light, but there is a possible plan at Microsoft to just consummate the acquisition, despite what in other words, if we get by the FTC, we're just going to do it,
right?
And the UK can figure it out.
Well, and obviously, so furthermore,
and then they could fine them, and they'll just protest the fines and go around in circles,
drag it out, because that's what happens.
The FTC. I mean, apparently, FTC was worried about this, which is why they asked for the injunction, saying, no, you cannot. Do the merger.
I describe this as the antitrust equivalent of a flight risk.
Right. Right. That makes sense.
Yes.
But it is not the final. It's not the final, though. That's what's weird.
But the ruling makes it very clear. All of the discovery has shown there's no reason to stop the merger.
Yeah, this judge tore the FTC a new one.
Right.
Any future judge that looks at this case is going to have to look at that and say, "Could you please explain why this is wrong?"
Oh, okay. So even though it's technically not precedent setting, you feel like it is.
So let's put. I guess the way I would say it is, the FTC has pushed forward a case to block this acquisition, literally on the merits of Sony's argument, which we now know to be baloney. Only what they have said publicly, because they just don't want it to happen, that they are worried that Microsoft will pull Call of Duty from their platform.
Even though they have no evidence of that. And in fact, contradictory evidence to that.
That's right. Tons of it. So I've always found it bizarre. I've said this many times, that a U.S. regulatory agency would protect a company from Japan over an American company buying another American company. And that's aside from all of this doesn't change the structure of the video game industry in the slightest kind of stuff. It certainly doesn't change the relationship of Microsoft to Sony in the console market, which is, I guess, the concern. Sony has spent a lot of time and money keeping Xbox down as much as possible. In fact, I think that's potentially illegal behavior when they go and pay publishers not to go to Xbox, that kind of thing. We can debate that. That's fine, whatever. But that's the FTC's case. So that was just proven. It was just ruled to be wrong. It's just not true. And we all know that. We're all logical people. We can look at it. We can see what's going on in the world. We know it's not true. Now we have a federal court, district court ruling that it's not true. So we have a little bit of precedent here, and there's a couple of things in the
Microsoft forced, right? Like what I appreciate is that this was Brad Smith's plan.
That's right.
Was to force them into this so you get the ruling to just stop the postponement.
I don't know if I can find this quickly, but there's also language in this ruling that talks about how the FTC has had over 18 months to do this. Yeah. And when Microsoft came and said, we got to get this going, we've been trying to do this forever.
Right.
The FTC tried to block it. And the judge said, like, you had 18 months to investigate this deal. Yeah. You don't need any more time.
No,
I'm
there's a point,
now.
But you're getting to a point of bad faith. Like if it wasn't a federal agency, if it was another entity, the judge would go, "Are you crazy? Yeah. This is bad faith.
You are wasting the court's time."
Yes.
Yeah.
And exactly. It's to the point where it's like, who's getting a share of the $3 billion? Like, what's going on here?
I know.
Like, you seem desperate to get him over that line.
So this is not victory parade balloons and confetti quite yet, but this is a major victory. And we all know there are two regulatory bodies that have tried to block this. This is a major defeat for the only one of those that matters. No offense to the UK, but it is, I think, telling that literally that day, like that day. Now I know they stepped it back a little bit, but the UK CMA, the Competition Market Authority, came out and said, we're willing to renegotiate. And this is to the point that the EU competition commissioner made back in May when she compared the way that the EU and the UK had handled this kind of regulatory stuff. It's like some people believe that your job is just to stop things from happening. It's like, no, your job is to do the right thing for competition and consumers. And what the UK is trying to do now is what it should have done all along, which was, we can't pass this unless you make some concessions. Let's talk about those concessions. And now that's what they're saying. And it's like, guys, you could have done this months ago.
Yeah.
You could have done this months ago. It's a lot like what the FTC tried to do there in June and just drag it out. They just, in other words, foot dragging so that that date comes and goes and the two companies say, forget it, it's just so insidious,
Okay, but is there any, are you going to look back in a year and say, look how horrible that merger was for us as consumers, or maybe
so
for
this
Microsoft?
Isn't Minority Report, and I cannot rule on a future crime. But here's what I'll say, and I think this is important.
It is kind of a merger of two big entities to make one even bigger.
It sure
entity.
is. It's
bigger entity that's not as big as the other entities that are already in the space.
That's right. They're two big entities, but they're not as big as the.
We should allow the agglomeration of all.
Sure,
of these.
It does. It absolutely means we should not block it. That's not reason to block it. That's not how the law works. Look, we can sit here and sort of be like, to my mind, I don't feel that it's fair for a couple of big companies to, and it's like, that's cute, but is what happens.
No, okay.
So,
you're right. The law says it has to be a monopoly. It's not a monopoly. So it's not, they're not using their monopoly power to enter a new market or anything like that.
Right. But
to answer your
law
question, aside, is this bad for gamers?
Let me answer your question. No, that's the point.
So.
It absolutely is not. No, it's not. I mean, look, there might be things that happen in the future. We go, but you got to kind of step through the stuff. The most important are all of the deals that Microsoft made with its competitors to bring key games, especially Call of Duty, to their platforms too.
Right.
Microsoft's claim that all we want to do is make these games more broadly available is a fact because it benefits them.
Yeah.
Microsoft
and Game Pass as a whole is an effort to make more games available to more people for longer.
Right. So
it's a way to keep old games alive.
The third biggest market for video games is consoles. That market is starting to fade, by the way. That came out in the court documents. The second biggest is PC games, which actually I think surpassed console
in
revenue,
dollar, not in dollar amount, in number of units. What?
Oh, I don't know. I can't. I'm sorry. I can only speak. I don't really have the exact statistics on this stuff. This is just.
It surprises me to hear there are more PC gamers than there are console gamers, but okay.
Console gaming is a small market.
I guess
there are 1 billion something PCs in the world. There are 20 million Xbox Series X and S's. It's not exponential, but it's a tiny comparative market.
Yeah.
The biggest market by far in video games is mobile.
Yeah, and that's obvious.
Microsoft has zero position in mobile. Right. They have a tiny position in PC, and they are in last place in consoles. If Microsoft should, through some strategy and by buying companies, somehow beat Sony in the console market, they are still a tiny part of the overall slice of gaming. And by the way, not that this necessarily factors into the legal decision that would go into allowing this. Sony is one of the most belligerent abusers of a market that has ever existed. The behavior that came out during this whole episode is astonishing, and I think needs to be looked at by regulators.
Yeah. The FTC should be moving on from this and on to anti-competitive practices by Sony.
Exactly. That should have been the takeaway from this.
Yeah.
But looking beyond that, and I think that the important part is it's not Microsoft is economically, driven to do the right thing, if you will, and keep these things on rival platforms. That's cute. But Microsoft is legally required because they have these agreements now to make that happen. So that's a completely different story. Will Microsoft release Xbox exclusives out of Activision Blizzard in the future? Yes. But you know what? That's that slice of the pie thing. What does it look like? The number of exclusives on PlayStation 5, the number of exclusives on Nintendo Switch, the number of exclusives on Xbox Series X and S. They can never keep up. They don't have enough games that they could make exclusive for that. They'll never compete on exclusives. So their best strategy is cross-platform. Microsoft wants the console market to die. They have to be realistic about it. It's not going away, not anytime soon, but it would be better for them. They're the only company in this business that loses money on every console they sell. That came out during this. It would be better for them if they could follow their most tried and true high margin business model, which is software and services, and just make it available everywhere, which is exactly what they've done with their biggest business, Office, right?
Well, all Microsoft cares about is selling more cloud and games run on cloud.
It all ties into this.
So you
right?
satisfied the business argument.
I think so.
But there's a little analogy.
You're a gamer. You're going to take it from the gamer perspective.
Yeah, from the gamer. There's a little analogy here that I think Richard might appreciate. I know you will, Paul.
Okay.
There's in 1896, a little beer company was founded in San Francisco called Anchor Steam Beer. They used a steam brewing process no one else does. And many consider them maybe the first craft brewery in the United States. I mean, this is 1896. About 8 years ago, they were bought by Sapporo. Now, this is a San Francisco landmark beer, just a classic. Yesterday, Sapporo announced they're putting them out of business. It's gone.
Interesting.
We have a little brewery over here called Lagunitas, wonderful craft brewery. Good friends of mine started it. They're happy because Heineken purchased them a few years ago, and they are 100 millionaires.
Right.
But I'm concerned the same thing will happen, that these big companies don't have the same incentive to produce small craft beers.
Yes.
I wonder what's going to happen to independent gaming if you have 5 giant companies dominating.
A couple of things, because you've set off a million things in my brain.
Now you want some beer for one, I know, but okay.
Yeah. So no. So look, Microsoft's not buying a bunch of craft beer brewers. They're buying one of the biggest video game makers on earth.
Mm-hmm. But their size alone means that it's going to be hard to compete against them. Maybe not. I don't know if you're an independent.
Well, how compete against them where? I mean, in other words,
they're just going to be so dominant that here's my real fear.
But they're not
just going to see a bunch of first-person shooters and MMORPGs, and we're not going to see the innovative.
Okay, listen. There are 2 companies that we're talking about here: Microsoft, which owns Xbox, and Activision Blizzard. Microsoft, which owns Xbox, has a tremendous independent game studio called ID at Xbox. They have been pushing this forever. Activision Blizzard does not. So listen, remember, you got to go back to the beginning of this. This thing was announced in January 2022. In late 2021, all this news came out about the horrible workplace sexual discrimination, abuse stuff under Bobby Kotick at Activision Blizzard. And the big hope, remember up front, before we sort of addressed all the regulatory stuff, we thought, and also before Microsoft had their own problems with this, we said, Microsoft's going to clean this up, right? We look at the way Microsoft was such a good steward to Minecraft, a product that has expanded cross-platform compatibility.
By the way, a Java product.
A Java product, yeah. Although, there's a non-Java version too, but their stewardship of GitHub, which has been incredible. We can look. The FTC tried to make a big deal of this, but we can look at their acquisition of ZeniMax Media, right, which is Bethesda, and you can say, "Oh, look at this! They bought this game studio. This game studio has hundreds and hundreds of games, and they made 2 of them Xbox exclusives. That's so sad. If you
there is, by the way, I'm just thinking there is a business precedent because the FTC, I think it was the FTC blocked for a long time T-Mobile Sprint merger because it would then reduce us to only 3 carriers in the U.S. And they were able to get concessions that made Dish the 4th carrier, which is kind of nutty. So there's a precedent. You don't want too much consolidation in a market.
You don't. But there is also
there's a schism in gaming, right? The bottom line is if you want to make a game that actually utilizes the PS5 or an Xbox One S, you need the better part of $100 million at a team of 300 in 18 months to bust asses to actually utilize that.
That's right.
But there's another market that's always existed that is the mobile gaming and the small game development. Because the internet exists.
That's true. I mean, you could develop a game for the iPhone yourself.
3 people, easy.
Small group.
Yeah, you could, but actually that speaks a lot to but that's what you were just talking about. So when the iPhone debuted, everybody and anybody had a fair footing on this store.
Look at Flappy Bird.
Bob on the street could exactly. Today that has consolidated. If you go and look, but there's not a lot of indie stuff going on in the top 10 on the App Store.
There's a lot of crap like Ebony.
But more to the point, that market has expanded such that there are like 1 billion whatever games in there, and really what you face is a situation where it's really hard to get Apple's attention because them promoting you is the only thing that can put you in front of all those eyeballs in a realistic fashion. And thus, yes, an individual can still create their own game on a phone. It's possible.
But you might not see another Call of Duty.
You almost certainly. It's just like a lottery ticket. Like you might win.
Well, if you talk about the top dozen games out there that are $1 billion games, none of them are new. Right. The industry has functioned this way for a long time.
Yeah.
It's too expensive to make these games to take any chances.
That's right. And listen, it's very interesting with technology that there will be these brief interludes that kind of change the way things are normally. So, for example, like Hollywood and these big blockbuster movies, right? For a long time, the only entities that could make movies were these gigantic corporations. Mm-hmm. Thanks to technology, individuals can make movies. Now, they don't go out and compete with Tom Cruise in a multiplex, obviously, but it's kind of fascinating how there's been they've just brought this kind of thing down to normal people, like what do you call this? I can't think of the right term, but that happens with tech all over the place. It happens in gaming. There are individuals can still do this. But
and it has happened recently. Like I would argue the last breakthrough game, not from the big conglomerates that has become huge, is Fortnite. And that's 6 years ago. So, I mean, if a game is hot enough, they've now formed Epic around it and so forth. Sure. And they had a bunch of other titles. But the reality is that was a breakout game. It wasn't even original, right? They were copying from PUBG. But it turned into a hit.
That's right.
Like that
game was originally about building things.
Yeah, and then it turned into a shooter. But the point being, the conglomerates move slow. It leaves room for agile, creative people to make great things.
All right, but we should go back to Leo's original example. We should just remember here that Anchor Steam did not have to sell the company.
Right.
They chose to do that. When you make a company, your goal is to make money somehow. You could sell it by, for example, Sam Adams was a craft brewer.
Yeah. And
now they exist in this weird nether region between big beer and craft because they're huge, but they're not as huge as Budweiser, which is owned by InBev now.
There's an even closer analogy. Rovio was founded by 3 Finnish college kids.
And they're owned by
2003.
Sega now, I think.
20 years later, they sell for $1 billion to Sega.
But that's always the point, right?
Yeah.
When you form a company, the idea is to make money. And if one of the ways you can cash out big time is to be acquired, right?
Right.
So there are people on the side. So there's
Which
people on the
doesn't
street.
set then the next 3 kids from Finnish university to start their company, right?
Actually, it does, because it's like we could get rich.
We could be rich someday.
Rovio.
Yeah.
Look, we could be the next Rovio.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, you're kind of looking at it from a personal standpoint. It's like, I feel bad as a fan of craft beer that this thing doesn't exist anymore. It's almost like saying, I feel bad that my indie band became really popular and sold out. And it's like, like I don't like REM anymore because now they're on the radio.
Steam guys, but you keep coming to that business thing. But I'm not going to get any more Christmas ale, and that's
I think
sad for
always
me.
More.
I think there's a market demand there. Somebody else is going to make it.
Well, that's what Out of Sync saying in IRC. A beer, the brewers can just go around the corner and start another one and make a better version of it. So that's a good point. Gaming is not quite so easy to do, but
depends on the game. Yeah.
I'll tell you from my personal point of view, I am a addicted fan of this game created by a tiny, scrappy little company called Valheim. And it's just a small group of developers. They made a lot of money selling it for $20 for the last, they came out in 2020 during the pandemic. And I think they really capitalized on that. I would hate for them to be bought by Epic or EA.
Yeah, but they would love for them to be.
They would be. But they would be happy. But is it good?
It's not. I mean, antitrust law can't be based on the fact that there's a fanboy out there that loves his little company.
Here's where this is a problem. It's not pure business. These are works of art, and so.
Okay, but.
I mean, honestly, the people who create it get to sell it, of course.
But we're not talking about this company. We're talking about Activision Blizzard. They're one of the biggest game
I know
publishers
they don't
in the
make
world.
anything.
It's a different. And by the way, the entire time they were steamrolling the industry and dominating and doing whatever they were doing, all kinds of indie games are still being made, right?
No, and they're horrific.
And
frankly, you could argue Bobby Kotick should not get $1.
Oh my God! That's obviously the worst part of this whole thing.
Yeah,
I think anyone would agree to that.
But this gets him out.
No,
he goes away after.
No,
this.
He's on the board. I think he stays.
Okay, but he's not
operating.
He's not running anything anymore.
By the way, the other part of this is the FTC is probably going to appeal. In fact, we'll probably get news any minute now that
it could, except for one thing. So if you read a lot of the analysis of this in the morning, the overwhelming trend you're going to see is legal experts think these people have no case. This should never have been brought. They should never have done this. This is a fool's errand at this point.
I have to say,
you're
though,
right. It could happen.
When you read these stories, I'm saying this not to you guys. I know you know this, but to the audience, always consider there is sometimes a subtext, which is, see that damn Lena Khan is over aggressive and she keeps losing. And so this is why you shouldn't regulate big tech. So there is definitely a group of people who don't want her to succeed because they want big tech to succeed.
To that point, though, that's very interesting because there's a real political thing there you could get into. There's sort of a feminism thing you could get into if you wanted to, right?
Absolutely.
Honestly, I think the argument I'm not going to look at sexuality or race or demographic or political party. If you look at what she has done, she has done potentially irreparable harm to the U.S. government's ability to regulate big tech because she has chosen the wrong targets and has lost.
You can make that argument. You bet.
Yes, and I want to be really clear.
There is a need for regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. We keep talking about this.
If you do it poorly, you cripple the ability to do it.
But the point I made in probably December 2022 when the FTC said we're going to block this was explain this to me. You've got Amazon, Apple, Google, and Meta running roughshod over these markets, harming competition, harming consumers. And you're going to go after this? This is where you're taking your stand? That to me was the stupidest. You've got these belligerent monopolists, or at least dominant market players, that are obviously doing harm, and you're going to go after this?
Yeah,
it just never made sense. It doesn't make sense today. And if they do appeal, they've jumped the shark.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
They're not paying attention.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's fair.